Welcome to Discovering. Tonight we learn how to build a traditional longbow.
Inside every piece of wood's a longbow. You just got to cut away all the stuff that's not the bow, and there you have it.
And look at this buck that, well, wasn't a buck.
I never with my own eyes actually seen a doe, or partially a doe, with antlers.
So sit back and relax. It's Monday night and it's time for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forest thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak. Surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields. Call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill. The eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
Welcome to Copper Country Bowworks. We're going to kind of show you the steps of building longbows, but before we do that, we're going to talk about the longbow, traditional bows. I've been shooting longbows for, I don't know, probably 25, 30 years now, and it's a simple bow. They're a lot of fun to shoot. So this is an older style, what's called an ASL or a hill style bow. You can see it's pretty straight, and when it's strung, and I'll string it up later, it's kind of D-shaped. This is what most people think of when they think of longbows, but there's many different styles and types of longbows. This is one of the models that I build. This is my Keweenaw model, and as you can see, it's got a lot of curve to the limb. It's not a recurve. A recurve bow really comes around a lot up here in the tip. The biggest difference between a recurve and a longbow is when this is strung, the string does not touch the limb at all. If it touches the limb after it leaves the string grooves, it's considered a recurve. So with a longbow, it can't do that. So even with this is called a reflex deflex style bow. It gives it a little bit more speed, a little bit smoother to shoot. It's a very popular style. It's also called a hybrid, which would be, I guess, kind of a hybrid between this style of longbow and a recurve. And then another style, this is I kind of liken this style to the fly fishing of archery. It's called a self bow. This is made by just taking a piece of Osage and shaving it out with a draw knife. And there's no fiberglass, there's no glue joints, there's nothing. It's just a solid piece of wood. That's what's called a self bow. Very simple bow. This style of bow has been around for thousands and thousands of years, and they shoot really well. So that's just a couple of the styles of longbows that are out there. There's a few others that I don't have. Today what we're going to do is we're going to go through the process I go through building a bow. Starts out as a couple of blocks of wood to a bow that looks like this, or like that. So this is my personal hunting bow for this year. This is my Norwich model. Just this one's pretty simple, just a hickory handle and some spalted tamarind on the limbs. The woods in the cores of the limbs in the center here I use are usually all the same. There's several different woods that make good cores. As far as the handles or the riser, this section here is called the riser or the handle. Can be just about any hardwood. This one is hickory, and then this black is a material called G10. It's a really dense, hard fiberglass type material. Gives the bow a little bit more mass weight. It's also extremely strong. The outer layer, there's a layer of clear fiberglass over this, but this outer layer is very thin. It's called a veneer, and you can do that with pretty much any wood. It doesn't really contribute to the strength of the limb or the performance of the limb. It's more decorative. I do bows sometimes, like if I red elm cores or even ash cores or whatever. If it has really nice grain to it, sometimes I won't do a veneer. I'll just use the core wood under the clear glass, and you can put some stain on it or dye or whatever. So there's a lot of different things you can do with them. We'll talk about that a little bit later as I go through. We're going to glue up a bow today and shape a couple other ones and kind of show everybody the process. Some of the woods we use, here's an example of a bunch of different ones. This is some UP curly maple, and it's got some nice color in it. This is black palm. This one's bacote. And this is another one called wenge. This looks pretty good. It gets really dark once it's finished. This is cocobolo. This has got some stunning color to it once it gets cleaned up. But these are all used for the riser, the handle portion of the bow. And we're gonna show how I shape those for the different models of bows. Some of the limb stuff I've used. This is a scrap piece left over of some spalted curly maple for the veneers on the limbs. I cut this really thin and run it through this machine to get it to the specific thickness. That goes just underneath the clear glass. In the middle part of the limb is several strips of what's called the core materials, the tapers. Depending on the design of the bow, they may have a certain amount of taper to them. This is a piece of red elm, which is what I use for my cores on my Keweenaw model and my Ottawa model. Real nice wood for cores. So what I'll do with this is I'll run it through the bandsaw, cut some thin strips, and then I machine them on this to get them smooth and to a specific thickness. When you build a bow, whether it be a longbow recurve, what determines the draw weight of the bow is three things: the length of the limb, the width of the limb, and the thickness of the limb. The length and the width are usually fixed by the design of the bow. So the only variable that I have, say for my Keweenaw model, it would be the thickness. The limbs are always the same width. So then I machine those strips down to the thousandths of an inch tolerance at different thicknesses. And so if I want to build a bow at, say, 50 pounds, I go to my chart and it'll say my total thickness of my limb, which would be the fiberglass, the veneers, and the tapers might be 0.400, thick. And then I sort that out by the strips and machine them down to that. So it's accuracy in that is very important. Just a couple thousandths of an inch can change the weight of the bow a pound. So if you're off, 10 thousandths of an inch, it could change the weight of that bow by 5 pounds. And usually when a customer orders a bow, they have a weight that they want, and I'll try to get that. Usually can get it within a couple pounds. Every bow starts out as a pile of wood. Inside every piece of wood's a longbow. You just got to cut away all the stuff that's not the bow, and there you have it. I'll show how I cut the strips, and then we'll shape out a riser and get that ready to go, and we'll glue up a bow here shortly. When I start making my tapers, I have a list of the finished thicknesses I need on each one. As I build, it's called the stack. You stack all those tapers together to build your limb. So boyers, we call it our stack thickness. So I make up a bunch of these little spacers here. It just gets me close on the bandsaw, and then I take the rest off on the drum sander. I cut these are all 3 feet long, 36 inches. On the back side of the bow, which would be the side facing away from you, when I glue it up, it's 72 inches. And that's following, 72 inches measured following the curvature of the bow. So these I have to splice together once I grind them to thickness, and we'll show how to do that here in a minute too. That only takes a couple minutes to do. And then the ones on the belly side of the bow, which is the side as you're holding it facing you, you don't have to glue these together. Next, I'll show you how to make a taper. This is a sled. This machine has to have a minimum thickness to work to sand. So this raises it up when you're working with strips that might only be 60 thousandths thick. It's too thin to run through by themselves. So I put these on the sled. Now this one's just a straight or parallel. There's no taper. I have other sleds that, for each inch of length, it tapers it by 1/1000th of an inch, 2/1000ths of an inch, 3/1000ths, so forth. All right, so when I'm done with that, I take this down to a specific thickness, and I was shooting for 90 thousandths, and I'm right on the money there. So what we gotta do now is we gotta go over to another machine over here and cut this little scarf joint in. I use this disc sander for that. grinds a nice wide glue surface, and I just overlap those like that, and we'll glue them together. This is just a little bit of super glue, and we'll glue up that scarf joint. So we'll let that sit for about 10 minutes, but that's how I make my tapers. And like I said, each bow has 2 or 3 of them. Now I'd go back and make another set of tapers while this is curing. And I usually I can do that faster than the glue will dry. So I'll get that done, and then I'll start marking out a riser and get ready to shape that. And we're gonna do that here in a couple minutes. The next step is to shape our riser. This one I've cut and I put some accent stripes in there. This wood is called bubinga. I have these different accent strips cut out, so then I'll just cut a thin slice like that out of that. That goes in there, and then just a couple more slices on the borders of it, real thin, that I take down on the drum sander, and then I just put that all together and glue it up and clamp it. So that's kind of how it'll look once it's done. You can see that green really just pops out of there, and the colors and whatnot. So when they're done, they look like this. What I've done here is I marked out, this will be the center of the bow. This will be the arrow shelf here. And then this is called the ramp and the fade outs. So when this goes into this form, like this, I'll lay my fiberglass and my tapers on here. And then this goes on, and then tapers and fiberglass again. So this has to come down at a nice smooth angle, and it fades out. I don't know how well you can see that, but that fades right out to nothing. So there's no big joint there when the bow glues up. What we're gonna do is we're gonna get this piece of wood just like this one. So the first thing I usually do is I put a little piece of tape on here. These are my templates for my different models. This curve is different from one to the other. So then I just take my pencil, scribe that line, and then we're going to go over to the bandsaw and I'll cut this off. What this does is this template exactly matches this, and I'll sand this down. And the reason why it's got to fit that exactly, if there's gaps, you'll see it as a wide, ugly glue joint. And we don't want that. So we'll take this over to the spindle sander. It is, this one takes a while. So this will be completely match this, but you see that how much is sticking up there? That's how much more I got to take off. But we're getting there. So what I'll do now is I'll lay a piece of glass and one of my tapers on there, and then I'll set this on there and see how well we fit. It should be pretty good. So I got a little bit of a gap here, which means I'm going to be high on the 2 ends. So I'll zip it through here a little bit more. Yep, we're good there. All right, so now that we've got the back side of the riser shaped to the form, I'll mark out where the arrow shelf will be, and then another line will be where the bottom of the handle portion, grip portion is. And then I'm going to mark in where the ramps and fade outs will be, and we'll cut those out on the bandsaw. And when I cut these out, I'll leave, like I said, a fair amount of excess material. So when I fade this out at the bottom, I don't get too thin. At any step in working on a bow, you can always take more off, but you can't put more back on. So once it's gone, it's gone. So now we'll just go over to the bandsaw and cut those out. Boyers are wood hoarders, so those I can slice some of that back off of there and use for tip overlays. Sometimes I'll keep these, sometimes I don't. Depends on what I got going in the future. But I don't throw it out until I can't use it for much of anything. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm just marking. I take a couple measurements at 1 inch and 2 inches from the ends. So I'll mark this out on both sides All right, I just got to switch this over and we'll grind these out. Just want to use a 3-inch for this. Less chance of getting a dip in the ramp. Every single bow I build, I try to make a little bit better than the last one. And every single bow I build, I'm real picky about whether it goes out of the shop or not. And there's some I've done that were pretty decent bows, but there was something in there I didn't like about it, and it didn't leave the shop. I won't send a bow out that I'm not happy with. Like I said, I want it to last somebody a lifetime. I want them to be proud of the bow that they own and be happy with the investment that they made in it. So that's how we shape the risers. So this is just about ready, would be just about ready to go on a bow. I'm not gonna use this one today. I've got one already pre-made, ready to go. Speed the process up. But this usually takes me over a couple of days to do a bow up like this. So now our next step will be I'll take all the parts over there, put them on the form and dry fit everything, make sure everything fits the way I want it. And then I'll get everything set up and we're gonna put a bow together and get it in the oven.
Constructing bows like this is an art, and similar to most things built by hand with great attention to detail, it's a lengthy process. We will be back next week to finish up the rest of the steps in building a longbow, plus John and I chat a little bit more about traditional archery, and I try my hand at shooting a longbow.
But this is exactly how you start out, close range, get a feel for it. Now, like I said, I would start you out with a little bit lighter bow. Okay. Unfortunately, I didn't have anything lighter than that around right now in stock. But you got it. There you go.
And now, switching gears, Brian has a story on a unique white-tailed deer harvested during the rifle season.
The firearm deer season. Hunt for a couple of weeks and talk about it forever. I visited with Carter Shiren, who shot a deer I'm sure he'll be talking about for years.
So we was on my grandpa's farm in Bark River, and we saw this a couple of times, and then I realized that it was kind of a cool buck, so I decided to shoot it. After we got up to it and started gutting it, my dad went to gut it, and then he realized it was a doe. After we hung it up, my dad knew one of the DNR officers, Coulter, and he called him because he was in the neighborhood. He came by and he aged it, and he said it was 6.5 years old, and confirmed it was a doe with horns.
Yeah, so actually it's kind of cool. When this deer was harvested, I was actually right down the road, and it was, I don't know, a weeknight sometime, and I was working down the road, and he called me to come over and see it, because I personally, and I've been here with the Department of Natural Resources for about 11 years, and I've seen a lot of deer. I work down here in the South Central UP where we have a number of deer, and we check a lot of deer, and I deer hunt, and I've actually never with my own eyes actually seen a doe, or partially a doe, with antlers. So I actually kind of had to teach myself a little bit, or do some research as to what causes this. And it's super rare. We don't have exact numbers because we just don't even see enough to have a rate of how often it happens, but it's extremely rare, across the country, and it's extremely rare here in Michigan. And so a deer like this that shows some sort of reproductive parts as a female, but yet it grows, antlers, is one of 4 things. It could be a hormonal imbalance that causes this, but those deer that typically have a hormonal imbalance typically they grow really, really small antlers, and I would consider these, they're definitely antlers. They're not just like a small spike. They could have diseased or degenerated ovaries. They already had it gutted by the time I got here, so some of that was, we don't know for sure. But again, with those, they usually just have like a velvet blob on the top of their head, and then this is much more than that. And the 2 other possibilities, it was a hermaphrodite or a pseudo-hermaphrodite. The hermaphrodite is they have both ovaries and testes, and then a pseudo-hermaphrodite is they have internal testes and no ovaries. So again, some of that was hard to tell because I wasn't here when it was gutted, but when you hear cactus bucks, which this looks a lot like what, you know, they call cactus bucks. Those are pseudo-hermaphrodites. So seeing what we see here and what they explained to me about what they saw when they gutted it is probably either hermaphrodite or a pseudo-hermaphrodite. So still super cool, super rare, and I was so excited to see it. I came over the night it was harvested. So when I showed up that night to see this deer, the mouth was still loose enough for me to age it because I didn't want to cut it because I wasn't sure if they were going to mount it or something. And it's a 6.5-year-old deer. So I'm glad they shared it with me, and it was cool for me to learn a little bit more about it because we rarely ever see it.
That's all for tonight, and I hope to see you right back here next week for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.